The classroom was still, the kind of silence that settled in just before the bell rang. Malik sat at the back of the room, his pencil scratching across the page as he focused intently on his notebook. To anyone else, it seemed like just another day. Another typical classroom filled with teenagers whose minds wandered as they waited for the school day to end. But for Malik, this was where his dream was being forged. His dream of becoming a doctor, a medical student, a healer. The words felt distant, almost surreal when they passed through his mind. People like him, people who looked like him, weren't meant to have dreams like this. They weren't meant to take up space in rooms where decisions about the future were made. But Malik had never been one to follow the rules of a world that had always told him no. As Mr. Hansen droned on at the front of the class, Malik's thoughts drifted away from the lesson. He was no longer seeing the chemical equations written on the board or the textbooks laid open on desks around him. Instead, he was back at home, studying for the entrance exams, reading books about the human body, practicing his handwriting for medical applications. He pictured himself in a white coat, standing in a hospital, making a difference. A snicker from the front of the room broke his concentration. Malik's eyes flickered up, and he saw a couple of the other students exchanging whispered laughs, the kind that wasn't meant for him but about him. It was a look he was used to, a silent judgment. "You think you're going to make it to med school, Malik?" That voice, dripping with sarcasm, sliced through the air like a knife. It was Brandon, one of the louder voices in the room. Brandon was always the one to laugh the loudest at anyone who dared to dream beyond their place. His tone, though light-hearted, carried a sharp edge that made it clear he wasn't joking. Malik's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let it show. He focused on his notebook, pretending not to hear. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, could feel the snickers rippling through the air, could almost hear Mr. Hansen's laugh joining in like it had before. The teacher had never been subtle about his disdain for Malik's ambitions. It was almost as if he found Malik's dream offensive, as if it didn't belong in a world like theirs. "Yeah, right," Brandon continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A kid like you, med school, that's for real students, not for—" He stopped mid-sentence, the implication hanging in the air like smoke. Malik's fingers tightened around his pencil, but he kept his face neutral, his eyes lowered to his notebook. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. But inside, his mind raced. It wasn't the first time he'd heard this, but something about the way Brandon had said it this time stung a little more. "Mr. Hansen," another voice piped up from the front. It was Katie, one of the girls sitting near the front, who always seemed to know when to speak up for the attention. "Are we really supposed to encourage kids who can't even manage their basic grades to dream so big?" She laughed lightly, but her eyes gleamed with something darker. Mr. Hansen, leaning against the chalkboard, gave a casual shrug. "Well, Katie," he said, his voice dripping with a sort of rehearsed indifference, "not everyone is cut out for the same things, but sure, Malik can dream. It's not a crime." There was no support in his words, just a quiet dismissal, wrapped in a few empty phrases. The entire class turned back to their books, but Malik could still feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just Brandon, it wasn't just Katie. It was everyone in the room. Their quiet judgment hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He knew he wasn't meant to be here, to be in this space with them. He wasn't meant to have dreams bigger than what they'd mapped out for him, but he was still here. He wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let them stop him. Not today, not ever. The bell rang, shattering the silence and signaling the end of class. But for Malik, the weight of the moment lingered. He grabbed his things quickly, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he packed up. As he stood, he caught Mr. Hansen's eye for a moment. The older man's gaze was cold, a subtle but deliberate look of disdain, and Malik could feel the judgment even from across the room. But this time, Malik didn't look away. He met Mr. Hansen's gaze head-on, refusing to let him see the doubt that had crept into his chest, refusing to let him think for a second that Malik would just quietly fade away. He walked out of the classroom with his head held high, but his heart was heavy. The world around him had just reminded him of what it thought of his dreams, of his place in it. And yet, there was a part of him, deep down, that burned brighter than ever. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, Malik walked out of the classroom and down the hall, the echoes of Brandon's taunts still ringing in his ears. His pulse raced, and his mind whirled with a mix of anger and frustration. He'd heard it all before. You're not good enough. You don't belong here. You're just dreaming too big. But today, it felt different. Today, the weight of their words was heavier, more suffocating. His fingers clenched around the straps of his backpack, knuckles turning white. He hated the way they looked at him, the way they thought his dream was some joke, something unattainable, just because of where he came from. His skin color, his background. It was always the same. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he pushed himself, they would always see him as less than. And that thought burned deeper than any insult. As he made his way toward the exit, he saw his sister, Keisha, standing near the lockers. Keisha was in her senior year at college, and she always seemed to know exactly when something was bothering him. Malik hadn't said a word, but she'd probably seen his face when he left the classroom. She knew. "Malik," Keisha said, her voice low but concerned. "You okay?" Malik looked at her, his chest tightening. "I'm fine," he said quickly, trying to brush it off, but Keisha wasn't fooled. "Don't lie to me," she snapped gently. "What happened?" Malik paused, not knowing where to begin. How could he explain everything? How could he explain the constant pressure, the weight of being the only black kid in a class full of kids who thought he didn't belong? He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out. Keisha stepped closer, sensing his hesitation. "Tell me, Malik, what happened?" "They just..." Malik trailed off, his voice barely above a whisper. "They just don't get it. They don't think I can do it. Mr. Hansen, he keeps putting me down in front of everyone. He laughed at me today. He said people like me don't get into med school." Keisha's face hardened, her jaw tightening. "I knew he was a jerk, but this is crossing a line." Malik glanced up at her, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I'm good enough." Keisha shook her head, taking a deep breath. "You are. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. You've been working for this since you were little, and you've got what it takes. Don't listen to them." Malik wanted to believe her, he really did. But it was hard when the world was telling him otherwise. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every time Malik walked into Mr. Hansen's class, his stomach churned with anxiety. The mocking, the dismissal, it all lingered in the air, hanging over him like a dark cloud. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him whenever he raised his hand to answer a question. He could hear the whispers behind his back, the soft chuckles that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It was as if they were waiting for him to fail. One day, Mr. Hansen called on Malik to answer a question about the human body. Malik had studied the material for hours, determined to prove that he belonged, that he could do this. When he answered, his voice shaky but steady, he expected something. Maybe a nod of approval, maybe even a small compliment. Anything to let him know that his effort wasn't being wasted. Instead, Mr. Hansen smiled, a thin, mocking smile that sent a chill down Malik's spine. "Well, Malik," Mr. Hansen began, his voice dripping with condescension. "That was a decent attempt, I suppose, but let's face it. A kid like you probably doesn't even know what it's really like in the medical world. You'll be lucky if you even get into a decent college." The words hit Malik like a slap to the face. His classmates chuckled, some even audibly snickering at his expense. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself to keep his eyes focused on the desk in front of him, his hands gripping the edge so tightly his fingers ached. He couldn't look up. He couldn't show them that he was hurt. But inside, the pain was sharp, cutting deep. At lunch that day, Malik sat alone at the back of the cafeteria. He had gotten used to eating by himself, the quiet moments where he could retreat into his thoughts, away from the noise of the school, the whispers, the stares. It was the only place where he felt like he could breathe. But today, even the solitude felt oppressive. He tried to focus on the lunch in front of him, picking at his food without really tasting it, but the words from Mr. Hansen echoed in his mind, drowning out everything else. "You'll be lucky if you even get into a decent college." His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Keisha. "How's it going? Did you talk to anyone?" Malik hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the keys. He didn't want to burden her with his problems. She had enough on her plate with school, with her own life. But he knew she cared. Knew she wanted to help, same as always. It's hard, they don't think I can do it. He stared at the message for a moment, willing his emotions not to spill over. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he could overcome this, that he could prove everyone wrong. But the doubt was eating away at him. A moment later, the reply came. You can do it. Don't let them win. You know why? Because people like us, people who've been told they don't belong, we have to fight harder. We have to be better. And you are. Malik closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But the weight of Mr. Hansen's mockery, the way it echoed through every moment of his day, was hard to ignore. He didn't know how much longer he could take it, how much longer he could fight against the constant stream of negativity. The next day, Malik found himself standing in front of Mr. Hansen's desk again. He had worked through the entire night, reviewing every possible medical term, every concept. He had studied with an intensity that was almost obsessive. He wasn't going to let the teacher mock him again. This time, he would show them all that he wasn't just some kid dreaming too big. He was someone who could do this. But as he entered the classroom, the air felt thick. The whispers started again, soft at first, but growing louder. Malik could feel them, the way his classmates looked at him, the way Mr. Hansen's eyes narrowed when he walked in. "Malik!" Mr. Hansen called out, his voice too smooth, too calculated. "I see you're back again. Do you actually think you've got what it takes to understand this stuff, or are you just going to keep faking it until you drop?" The words felt like a physical blow. Malik stood frozen in place, his throat tightening. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the world had suddenly grown too small, and he was trapped in it, suffocating. He wanted to leave. He wanted to escape, to hide from the humiliation, but he couldn't. He had to prove them wrong. He had to prove that he belonged here, that he could do this. With a shaky breath, he forced himself to answer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can do this. I'm going to medical school." The room went silent. For a split second, the entire class seemed to freeze. And then the laughter began, soft at first, then louder, echoing through the room like a chorus. Brandon's voice rang out above the others. "Yeah, sure. Keep dreaming, Malik. You'll never get in. People like you don't get into med school." Malik's heart raced, but this time he didn't shrink. He didn't look away. He looked directly at Mr. Hansen, who was watching him with a smug smile. "You'll see," Malik said, his voice steady now, more certain than it had ever been. "I will make it, and I'll be better than all of you." The class fell silent once again. Malik knew it wasn't over. He knew that the road ahead was going to be hard, that the challenges would only grow more intense. But for the first time, he felt something inside him shift. He wasn't just fighting for his dream anymore. He was fighting for himself, and he wasn't going to stop. The tension in the room was thick, but Malik didn't let it control him. He walked out of the classroom with his head held high, refusing to let the mockery follow him. He had a new sense of purpose now, a fire that burned inside him with a fierce intensity. This was just the beginning. The days after Malik's confrontation with Mr. Hansen were a mix of quiet determination and mounting tension. Despite the ridicule, Malik's resolve to prove himself only grew stronger. The mocking words, the subtle undercurrent of racism, and the quiet judgment from his peers, he carried it all with him like a heavy weight. But each step he took in the hallways, each answer he provided in class, he did so with more conviction. He couldn't afford to let them see him break. But what he didn't know, what no one in the classroom had realized, was that someone had witnessed everything that day. Someone who was not only a stranger to the school, but had once been in Malik's shoes. She was there, standing outside the classroom, hidden in the hallway, and she'd overheard everything. Keisha, Malik's older sister, had returned to the school that morning, hoping to speak with a few of her old professors about an internship opportunity she was applying for. It wasn't often that she came back to visit, but today she was here for business, and maybe for a little closure. She hadn't forgotten the toxic environment she'd escaped from, but she had never anticipated that she would witness the same kind of prejudice she had fought against during her own time at the school. Keisha had been walking down the hall, her thoughts distracted by her own plans, when she heard the raised voices from the classroom. She stopped, hesitant at first, but curiosity drove her closer, and then she heard it. Malik's name being tossed around with cruel humor. his ambitions mocked by none other than Mr. Hanson. The familiar sting of disbelief shot through her. She could hear her brother's voice shaking slightly, but it was filled with determination. She knew him too well to miss the anger behind it. Keisha didn't move. She stood there, hidden just around the corner, her chest tightening as she listened to the teacher's dismissive tone. She could feel the tension building as the room fell silent after Malik's confrontation. It was the same pattern, the same subtle undermining that had poisoned her high school years. She had fought hard to escape it, to carve out a place for herself. But now, here was Malik, facing the same battle, her stomach twisted with a mix of anger and helplessness. She had done everything she could to prepare Malik for the world, everything she could to make him feel strong enough to challenge the barriers others tried to set up for him. But hearing Mr. Hanson's words, she realized just how far the system had entrenched itself, how deep the roots of racism and prejudice ran, even in the supposedly progressive educational system. Later that evening, Keisha found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, but not really seeing the messages or emails scrolling across the screen. Her mind was elsewhere, on Malik and the storm that had been brewing ever since he'd mentioned wanting to be a doctor. She had known it would be hard for him. She had known he would face obstacles that most people would never even understand. But this was different. This was a deliberate attempt to tear him down, to make him doubt himself and his dreams. When Malik walked into the kitchen later that evening, his eyes red-rimmed and his shoulders stiff, Keisha knew he had heard what Mr. Hanson had said. She could see it in the way he carried himself. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that had taken root in him. "Malik," Keisha said softly, setting her phone down and meeting his eyes. "How was school today?" Malik hesitated, his jaw tightening as he looked away. But then he sighed, slumping into a chair across from her. "Same as always," he muttered. "I don't know, Keisha. I'm just tired. Tired of trying to prove them wrong, but they just keep pushing. It's like they think I'm not even supposed to be here." Keisha's heart ached. She had been ready to listen, to offer him her support. But hearing him say those words, the same ones she had whispered to herself during her own struggles, struck her harder than she expected. "I know," she said softly. "I know how hard it is, but you have to keep going. Don't let them win, Malik. They want you to believe you don't belong, but that's their problem, not yours." Malik shook his head, frustration etched into his face. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. They keep laughing even when I try my best. It's like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Keisha took a deep breath, feeling the anger that had been bubbling inside her rise to the surface. "Malik, listen to me. You are enough. You are more than enough. But I know what they're doing. They want to make you feel small. They want to make you feel like your dreams are too big, too impossible. But you can do this. You have to believe that." She paused, her eyes hardening with resolve. "And if they think you're not good enough, then we'll prove them wrong. We'll show them what you're capable of." Over the next few days, Keisha spent more time with Malik, helping him build the confidence he needed to take on the battles he was facing. They spent hours going over applications for summer internships at hospitals, reviewing medical journals, and planning out his future. Keisha pushed him harder than she had ever pushed him before, making sure he knew exactly what was at stake. She wasn't just helping him with his homework, she was preparing him for the fight of his life. But the tension at school didn't ease. In fact, it seemed to intensify. Malik's classmates continued to make fun of him, sometimes subtly, sometimes more overtly. Brandon, emboldened by the support of his peers, continued to mock Malik's dream of attending medical school, always making sure to say it loudly enough for others to hear. Even some of Malik's friends began to distance themselves, too afraid to align with someone who was, in their eyes, too ambitious. The whispers followed him down every hallway, every corridor, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. One afternoon, just a week after Malik had openly stood up to Mr. Hanson, Keisha walked by the classroom again. This time, she didn't hide. She had come to see Malik to make sure he was okay. But as she passed Mr. Hanson's class, she couldn't help but stop. Through the window, she saw Malik sitting at his desk, his eyes fixed on his notebook, but his posture stiff, as though he was bracing himself for another verbal blow. And that's when it happened. Mr. Hanson, his back turned, was talking to another teacher, Keisha could see the way his hands gestured as he spoke, the smug look on his face as he muttered something Malik couldn't hear. But then, as if to make sure Malik was listening, Mr. Hanson turned around and said something loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Yeah, I really don't know why he even tries," Mr. Hanson said with a laugh. "A kid like him, I'm sure he's just wasting his time. But let him dream. It'll keep him occupied for a while." The words were cruel, and Keisha felt her blood boil as she stood there, watching the whole scene unfold. Her hands clenched into fists, but she didn't move. She knew that confronting Mr. Hanson now would only make things worse for Malik, but something had to be done. She couldn't just stand by and let this continue. The next day, Keisha took matters into her own hands. She couldn't let her brother continue to be humiliated. She called the principal's office asking for a meeting, and when she arrived, she wasn't prepared to sit back and simply ask for a solution. No, today, Keisha was ready for war. She walked into the office, her resolve firm, her anger bubbling beneath the surface. She wasn't just going to protect Malik. She was going to protect every student who had been hurt by teachers like Mr. Hanson. Every kid who'd been told they weren't good enough because of where they came from, the color of their skin, or the dreams they held. She was tired of the quiet racism that seeped through the cracks of the system, of the subtle but persistent ways it held people back. "Mr. Lawson," Keisha began, her voice calm but firm, "I'm here because I need to make something clear." "What, Mr. Hanson said about my brother is unacceptable. He's been publicly belittling Malik and undermining his dreams, and I'm not going to let it slide." The principal, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Keisha, I understand you're upset, but we need to address this calmly. I'm sure Mr. Hanson didn't mean to offend anyone." Keisha's eyes narrowed, her voice hardening. "No, I've heard it with my own ears. He's been making jokes about my brother's future, about his dream to go to medical school. And it's not just my brother. It's about every student of color who's been told they don't belong here. Every single one of them who's been pushed aside because they're not seen as worthy." There was a long silence as the principal stared at her, his expression shifting. Keisha didn't give him a chance to speak. "I want him held accountable," she said, her voice unyielding. "And I want to make sure this never happens again, not just for Malik, but for everyone who's been pushed aside." The principal's eyes widened, but for the first time, Keisha could see something shift in his gaze. He knew she wasn't backing down. He knew she was ready to fight, and he wasn't going to win this one. "I'll look into it," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Keisha stood, her shoulders squared. "You better, because if this isn't resolved, I'll make sure the entire school knows what's happening here." As she left the office, Keisha felt a surge of power. This was just the beginning. The fight had started, and she wasn't going to stop until they had won. Let's take a quick pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to our stories from? Have you experienced anything similar in your life? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming content. Now, let's continue. Malik's heart thudded painfully against his chest as he stood outside Mr. Hanson's classroom. He had just handed in his most recent science assignment, a project he had worked tirelessly on, determined to prove himself. He had stayed up late, reviewed every page, and practiced his presentation in front of the mirror, trying to perfect every word. This was his chance, his moment to show his teacher and his classmates that he wasn't just another statistic, that he was capable of much more. But as he waited by the door, he could feel the pressure mounting, a familiar sense of dread settling in his stomach. The bell rang, signaling the start of class, but Malik was rooted to the spot. It wasn't just the fear of being humiliated again. It was the weight of all the years of being told that he didn't belong, that his dreams were too big for someone like him. Those words, "You can't do it. You'll never make it. You don't belong here," were like chains around his heart, each one tightening with every passing moment. He had been ready to fight back. He had wanted to stand up for himself when Mr. Hanson had mocked him the day before. But Malik knew he couldn't fight hate with more hate. He had to show them that he was strong enough to take their punches and keep moving forward. He had to prove to himself that he could succeed, despite all the odds stacked against him. The door to the classroom opened, and Mr. Hanson stepped out, his eyes locking onto Malik for a moment before moving on. The dismissive look in his eyes made Malik's stomach twist. It was as though the teacher didn't even acknowledge his presence. To Mr. Hansen, Malik was just another kid in the way of his perfect classroom. Just another kid who was never meant to amount to anything. "Malik, you ready for today?" "Mr." Hansen asked, his tone sharp and casual, as if their previous confrontation had been a simple misunderstanding. Malik forced a smile, though his mind was screaming. "No, I'm not ready for this. I'm never ready for this." He nodded, his voice steady but barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Hansen, I've done the work." "Let's see if it's enough," Mr. Hansen said, and his voice dripped with something darker, something that made Malik feel small and invisible. He wanted to scream, to shout that he had earned his place in that classroom, that he deserved every moment, every opportunity. But the words wouldn't come. Malik followed Mr. Hansen into the classroom, where the rest of the students had already gathered. The other students glanced at him briefly as he entered, their eyes cold and uninterested. He could hear the faint murmurs, the quiet laughter that always seemed to surround him when he walked in. It wasn't anything overt, just the subtle looks of judgment, the casual whispers that told him he didn't belong, that he wasn't like them. "All right, class," Mr. Hansen said, clapping his hands together to gather attention. "Today, we're going to discuss the science projects. Malik, since you've been so eager, let's see what you've got." Malik's throat tightened, but he stood up and walked to the front of the room, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on him. His hands shook as he set up his project. It was a simple model of the human circulatory system, but Malik had poured hours into making it perfect, detailing each part with precision. This was his chance to show that he wasn't just a kid from a broken home, that he wasn't just a statistic. This was his moment to be seen for what he truly was, a hard-working, determined student who deserved a chance. "Well, let's see what you've got," Mr. Hansen said again, a sharp edge to his voice. Malik swallowed hard, his eyes focusing on his project as he started his presentation. The words came out slower than he wanted, his nerves betraying him, but he pushed through. He spoke about the heart, the arteries, the veins, explaining the intricacies of the human circulatory system with confidence. He made eye contact with the students. Some stared back, but others were already bored, looking at their phones or doodling on the back of their notebooks. He felt their disinterest, the invisible barrier that separated him from them. But then, just as he reached the most complicated part of his presentation, Mr. Hansen interjected, his voice cutting through Malik's thoughts like a knife. "Malik, come on, you're seriously telling me this is what you've been working on?" Mr. Hansen's voice was dripping with sarcasm. "This is nice, I guess. But seriously, this isn't going to cut it for medical school, is it? Do you even know what it takes to get into med school? I mean, let's be honest, people like you—" The word stopped. It was as if time had frozen. Malik's heart raced in his chest. "People like you." The words hit harder than anything Mr. Hansen had said before. The subtle racism behind his words, the way he had made it clear that Malik's dream was too big for someone like him, was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just mockery now. It was a full attack on his identity, an attack on everything Malik had worked for. "People like me," Malik repeated, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Mr. Hansen shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "Yeah, come on, Malik. You're not cut out for this. You'll figure out what's more your speed, like nursing or something maybe. But medical school, that's for people who actually know what they're doing, not kids who just want to play dress up." The entire class laughed. It wasn't even a loud laugh, just a low, condescending chuckle that made Malik feel small, worthless. His stomach twisted with a deep, nauseating feeling. His hands, which had been shaking, now felt cold and stiff. Malik opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. But it was different now. This wasn't just about the project or Mr. Hansen's criticism. It was about something deeper. It was about the years of being told he wasn't good enough. Years of being made to feel like an outsider, like his dreams were just that. Dreams, far beyond his reach. He turned around quickly, grabbing his notebook and his project, walking out of the classroom without saying a word. He didn't want to show the class that their laughter had gotten to him. He didn't want Mr. Hansen to see him falter. But as he left the room, his vision blurred. He couldn't stop the tears that welled up in his eyes. Outside in the hallway, Malik leaned against the lockers, his breath ragged. He wiped his eyes quickly, frustrated with himself. He wasn't going to let them see him cry. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. But the words kept playing in his head. People like you don't get into med school. He didn't know how long he stood there, breathing deeply, trying to control his emotions. His sister Keisha had always told him to be strong, to keep going when everything felt like it was falling apart. But in that moment, he didn't feel strong. He felt broken. Malik! He turned around quickly, wiping his face once more, and saw Keisha standing there. Her face was filled with concern, but there was a fire in her eyes. Keisha had always been the one to understand, to pick up the pieces when things got tough. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, stepping toward him. Malik didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if he could speak without breaking down. But then he saw Keisha's face, the way she had always been his rock, and something inside him clicked. "I'm fine," he said finally, forcing himself to look her in the eye. "But I'm tired of this. I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong. I'm tired of people telling me I can't do it. I know I can." Keisha's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know you can too, but they don't get it. They don't understand what it's like to fight for something they think they can take from you. You just keep proving them wrong, Malik. Keep pushing. You're stronger than they'll ever understand." Malik nodded, a flicker of determination lighting his chest. He wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not ever again. He wiped his face one last time and stood tall, looking his sister in the eye. "I'm going to medical school, Keisha. No matter what they say, I'm not stopping." And as he walked back into that classroom, head held high, he knew this was only the beginning of the fight. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Malik walked into school the next morning with a fire in his chest. The feeling of humiliation from the day before still stung, but it no longer made him weak. If anything, it had fueled something inside him, something deep, something unshakable. He wasn't going to let Mr. Hansen or anyone else dictate his worth, not anymore. He had already come this far, and he would go further. He could feel the eyes of his classmates as he walked down the hallway. Some curious, others still mocking, but none of it mattered. The whispers still followed him like a shadow, but he had learned to tune them out. There was only one thing that mattered now, proving them wrong. As he entered his first class, Malik felt a weight settle on his shoulders. His body was still tense from yesterday's confrontation, and he could feel his heart racing. The classroom seemed quieter today, the usual murmur of conversation replaced with a sense of anticipation. Every student, even the ones who usually ignored him, seemed to be watching. The weight of the looks on his back made it hard to breathe, but he didn't look away. He couldn't afford to. It was during chemistry class when things took an unexpected turn. Malik was sitting near the front today, his eyes focused on the board as Mr. Hansen began his lecture. The teacher had barely acknowledged him since their last confrontation, but Malik could sense that something was brewing, a tension in the air, as though the entire room was waiting for the next move. "All right, class," Mr. Hansen said, pacing in front of the board. "Today we're going to review the project submissions. Malik," he said, turning his gaze to Malik with a smirk that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Why don't you come up and explain your project to the class? Let's see if it's really as good as you think." Malik's stomach twisted. He could feel the familiar wave of anxiety rising, but he forced himself to stand up, his hands slightly trembling as he grabbed his project off the desk. His presentation yesterday had been humiliated by Mr. Hansen, but he wasn't about to let that happen again. He had studied hard, he knew his material, and if he had to face the classroom again, he would do it on his terms. As he walked to the front of the room, he felt the eyes of his classmates on him. The murmurs began, quiet at first, but growing louder. His classmates, who had once turned their backs on him, were now whispering among themselves. The cruel taunts from Brandon echoed in his mind. "You'll never get into med school. People like you don't get into med school." Malik set up his project, trying to steady his breathing as he looked at the class. Mr. Hansen didn't even try to hide the mockery in his eyes. He stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching with an expression that was almost expectant. It was as if he was waiting for Malik to fail. "Go ahead," Mr. Hansen said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if you've learned anything." Malik took a deep breath and started his presentation. He spoke slowly at first, finding his rhythm as he detailed the chemical reactions involved in the human body. His project, a model showing the effects of different chemicals on human cells, was something he had spent countless hours perfecting. The words flowed more easily now. He wasn't just speaking to them, he was speaking to himself, reminding himself that he was good enough, that he could do this. Malik, Mr. Hansen interrupted suddenly, cutting him off mid-sentence. You're really trying to convince us that this is top-tier work. You've clearly just copied the basic concepts from online resources. Where's the originality? This is what I expected from someone like you, a half-baked idea. The sting of Mr. Hansen's words hit Malik like a slap, but he refused to let it show. The classroom fell silent, the tension thickening in the air. The laughter from the day before, the mocking smiles, seemed to come alive again in his head, but this time, he pushed it all aside. He wouldn't let it consume him. I put in the work, Malik said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. And I can explain every part of it, if you give me a chance. But Mr. Hansen wasn't having it. A chance? Malik, let's be realistic here. People like you don't get into the kinds of schools you're talking about. You're not cut out for this kind of work. Maybe you should aim for something more realistic, maybe something less ambitious. The words hit harder than anything else. People like you. It was a refrain that had followed Malik for years, and now it was being echoed by someone in a position of power, someone who could shape his future. But Malik wasn't going to let that definition of him hold any weight anymore. He refused to believe it. He stood tall, refusing to cower under Mr. Hansen's words. I am cut out for this, he said, his voice louder now. I know what I'm capable of. I've been working for this my entire life, and I won't let someone like you tell me I can't do it. The room was silent for a moment. Then, Brandon broke the silence with a loud laugh. Oh, this is rich. You actually think you can make it? You're not even in the same league as the people who go to those schools. You'll never even get close. Malik felt his heart race, his fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to lash out, to scream that he was more than the sum of their judgments. But instead he took a deep breath and turned to face Mr. Hansen one last time. This isn't about you, Brandon, or you, Mr. Hansen. This is about me, and I'm not going to let your ignorance define me anymore. He grabbed his project, turned, and walked out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Behind him, the whispers started again, but he didn't care. He had made his stand, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, Keisha found Malik sitting on the steps outside the school, his backpack lying at his feet. He was staring at the ground, his hands resting on his knees. It had been a few hours since his confrontation with Mr. Hansen, but the weight of it all still hung heavily in the air. Keisha sat down beside him, her eyes soft with understanding. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, letting him process everything in his own time. But Malik, as if sensing her presence, finally spoke up. I did it, Keisha, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I stood up for myself, but it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like they've won anyway. Keisha sighed, her heart aching for him. It's not about winning or losing right now, Malik. It's about knowing who you are, about believing in yourself, even when no one else does. You're doing the right thing, and you're going to get through this. Malik nodded, his mind racing with doubt. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't make it? That's the thing, Malik, Keisha said, her voice firm. They'll always try to tell you that. They'll always tell you that you're not good enough, that you don't belong, but you have to ignore them. You have to believe in yourself. No one else can define you. Only you can do that. For the first time in days, Malik felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could fight through the hate, the doubt, the constant pressure to be something he wasn't. Maybe he could rise above it all. I'm not giving up, Malik said quietly, his voice steady. No matter what they say, I'm not going to stop. Keisha smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. That's all I need to hear, little brother. Keep fighting, keep proving them wrong. Malik stood up, a renewed sense of strength filling him. He wasn't sure how he was going to do it, how he was going to make it to medical school, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them win. No matter how many times they tried to tear him down, he would rise. And so, the fight continued. The next few days were filled with the aftermath of his confrontation with Mr. Hansen. The whispers didn't stop. The mocking didn't stop. But Malik no longer felt like he was drowning in them. Instead, he used them to fuel his determination. Every comment, every look, every laugh from his classmates only pushed him harder. He started to stay up later at night, studying harder, planning his future with an intensity that surprised even him. He would show them. He would show them that his dreams weren't too big, that he wasn't just some kid from the wrong side of town, who didn't belong. He would make it. And when he did, they would have no choice but to acknowledge him. He was ready for whatever came next, because, for the first time in a long time, he believed in himself. And that was all that mattered. The battle was far from over, but Malik had found the strength to keep fighting, and with each step, he got closer to his dream. The days following the confrontation with Mr. Hanson and his classmates were a blur of conflicting emotions for Malik. On one hand, his resolve to prove himself had never been stronger, but on the other, he felt the weight of being an outsider pressing down on him more than ever. Every day, the subtle racism, sometimes whispered, sometimes more overt, followed him like a shadow. His classmates' mockery had escalated into something more dangerous, and the ridicule from his teacher had left a scar on his soul that he wasn't sure how to heal. Malik had always been used to being underestimated, but there was something about the weight of their words that felt different now. It was as if every time someone doubted him, they were chiseling away at his self-worth, carving out a space where his dreams didn't belong. And no matter how hard he tried to fill that void with self-belief, the silence left behind by their words was deafening. The whispers in the hallways had become a constant companion. As he walked through the school, Malik could feel the stares on him, some curious, others openly hostile, some even full of pity. They knew his story, or at least they thought they did. To them, he was just another kid who would never make it. "You're wasting your time, man," Brandon's voice echoed in Malik's head as he walked into his next class. "You can't make it." The words had become a mantra, a cruel song that played on repeat whenever he tried to focus on something else. The mockery didn't end at school. Even at home, where he'd hoped to find some refuge, Malik felt the pressure building. Keisha, his sister, had always been a source of strength, someone he could turn to when the world seemed too heavy. But lately, even she seemed to be under pressure. Her own battles in college were wearing her down. She wanted to help him, to push him harder, but there was only so much she could do from a distance. They both knew the fight Malik was facing wasn't just about grades. It was about something deeper. It was about survival in a world that seemed bent on telling him he didn't belong. One afternoon, as Malik sat alone in the library after school, staring blankly at his textbooks, something unexpected happened. A soft voice broke through the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. "Hey." Malik looked up, startled. He didn't expect anyone to approach him. The library was one of the few places where he could just blend into the background, escape the constant judgment. But there, standing in front of him, was Sarah, one of the quieter girls in his class, someone who always kept to herself. Malik had never really spoken to her. She was the kind of student who stayed under the radar, kept her head down, and never sought attention. In fact, she seemed to avoid it. "Hey," Malik replied, his voice tentative. "Can I help you with something?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes flicking to the ground before she took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "I just wanted to say that I saw what happened the other day in class, with Mr. Hanson and, with the rest of the class." Malik froze, his stomach sinking. He thought he'd escaped the ripple effect of his confrontation. He didn't want to think about it anymore, didn't want to relive the humiliation. "Look," Sarah continued, her voice low but earnest, "I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be the only one who doesn't fit into their little world. The one they laugh at, the one they try to push aside because you don't look like them or think like them. But I just wanted to say I don't agree with any of it. I think you deserve better than that, and I think you can make it." Malik was stunned into silence. He didn't know what to say. Sarah had always kept to herself. In fact, most of the class barely even noticed she existed. But here she was, standing in front of him, offering words of support when no one else had. "Why are you saying this?" Malik finally asked, his voice filled with confusion. "Why now?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag. "Because I've been watching. I've been watching for a while, and I know how hard you've been trying. I know how they treat you, and I don't think it's right. I guess I just wanted to let you know that someone sees it. I see it. Malik's mind raced. Someone sees it. In all the years of being pushed down, of feeling invisible, those words carried more weight than he could put into words. It was as though Sarah had unlocked something in him that he hadn't even realized was there. A spark of hope, however small. But as grateful as Malik felt, doubt crept in. Why now? Why was Sarah, of all people, speaking up? It felt like a kindness, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. Mr. Hanson's ridicule, the taunts from his classmates, those scars didn't fade just because someone noticed them. Still, there was something in Sarah's eyes that told him she wasn't just pitying him. She wasn't speaking out of guilt or obligation. She was doing it because she genuinely believed in him. And for the first time in a long while, Malik felt a spark of something more than just resistance. He felt a shift, a glimmer of possibility. "Why don't you sit down?" Malik said, offering her a seat across from him. "You're right. I've been struggling to keep my head above water." Sarah hesitated before sitting down. She pulled out a notebook and glanced at him. "I've been struggling too, you know," she said, her voice quieter now. "I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong, to be looked at like you're not good enough. And I've seen it. I've seen how they treat you, the way they think they can just tell you what you can and can't do. It's like they think we're not allowed to have dreams, right? Like it's not meant for people like us." Malik's heart clenched at her words. It was like she had been watching the same battles he had been fighting the same invisible enemy that had spent so long telling him he wasn't worthy. "I know," Malik said softly, looking down at his hands. "It's like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough. Like every step forward is met with 2 steps back. And the worst part is, I've been made to believe it. For a long time, I thought maybe they were right, that I wasn't meant for this." Sarah shook her head, her expression hardening with determination. "No, that's exactly what they want you to believe. They want you to doubt yourself. They want you to think that your dreams are too big. But they're wrong. Don't let them steal that from you." Malik looked at her, stunned. He had expected sympathy, maybe even pity, but not this. This was something more, something stronger. "Why do you care?" he asked, still skeptical but intrigued. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah met his gaze without hesitation. "Because it's not just about you. It's about all of us who've been made to feel small, all of us who've been told that our dreams are too big. We need to show them that they're wrong. We need to show them that we can do anything we set our minds to." Her words settled in Malik's chest like a weight, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It felt like a challenge, a call to action. Something inside him stirred, a fire that had been smouldering for far too long. "I don't know what to do," Malik said, his voice uncertain. "I don't know how to keep going when it feels like the whole world is against me." "You keep going because that's what they're afraid of," Sarah said firmly. "They want you to quit. They want you to give up and walk away. But that's not who you are. You're stronger than they think." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and true. For the first time, Malik felt the weight of their meaning. Sarah wasn't just some passive bystander. She was taking a stand. She was calling him to rise above the hatred, the doubt, the racism that tried to box him in. She was reminding him that he had a voice. He had a choice. "All right," Malik said, finally looking up at her with a newfound sense of determination. "I'll keep going. I won't let them win." Sarah smiled at him, her eyes filled with something like pride. "Good, because this is just the beginning. We're in this together now." The rest of the school year passed in a blur, but the difference in Malik was palpable. With Sarah's unexpected support and Keisha's constant encouragement, he began to find his footing again. Each day was a battle, but now, instead of shrinking from the stares, the whispers, and the ridicule, Malik met them head on. With every harsh word, every sneer, he pushed forward, focusing on the goal that was still just out of reach, but slowly becoming more attainable. And when the time came for the college applications to be submitted, Malik didn't hesitate. He poured every ounce of his effort into his essays, his recommendations, his personal statements. He knew he had to be better than his peers. He had to work harder, push further. But this time he wasn't doing it alone. This time he had allies. and they weren't going to let him fail. The battle was far from over, but Malik knew for the first time that he had the strength to fight back. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard they tried to keep him down, he would rise. The path ahead was still filled with obstacles, but Malik had finally realized something crucial. His dreams were worth fighting for, and no one, no teacher, no classmate, no system, could take that away from him. And so, the fight continued, one step at a time, with every ounce of strength he had. Malik sat at his desk, the weight of the textbooks in front of him feeling heavier than usual. The clock ticked slowly, its sound filling the room with the kind of silence that made everything seem oppressive. It was late, way past the time when most of the other students had already gone home. But Malik couldn't leave. Not yet. He had a future to fight for, and every hour, every minute he spent trying to get ahead was one more step toward proving everyone wrong. For the past few weeks, Malik had been buried in his studies, poring over medical textbooks, researching programs, making connections, and pushing himself harder than he ever had before. Each night, he had worked late into the evening, hoping that this time, the effort would be enough. But the pressure was building. The weight of being constantly looked down upon was starting to wear on him again, even though he had fought so hard to overcome it. The school year was coming to a close, and as the summer break approached, Malik knew that the real challenge was just beginning. College applications were right around the corner, and every word, every decision would determine whether he would get the chance to prove himself to the world, or whether he would be cast aside, just like Mr. Hanson and the others had always wanted. But every day, the tension mounted. The sneers in the hallways grew sharper, the mockery from his classmates intensified, and it wasn't just the kids in his class anymore. Even students from other years, students who had no real reason to care, started whispering about him. Word had spread that Malik was serious about becoming a doctor, that he was applying to some of the best medical schools in the country, and as soon as the rumor reached the halls, it became ammunition for everyone who wanted to see him fail. He couldn't walk through the hallways without hearing it. The laughing, the mocking comments from the back of classrooms, the casual insults. Yeah, right. A doctor? That's funny. He can't even pass basic chemistry. Malik, you can barely write a paper. What makes you think you can get into med school? That's cute. Dream big, buddy. Dream big. Maybe you'll be the janitor in the hospital instead. But Malik wasn't the only one who noticed. His old classmates from the advanced classes, the ones who had been quiet observers before, were beginning to stir. They had started to notice the injustice, the way Malik was being treated, and some of them were starting to question the system. It wasn't just that they sympathized with him. It was that they were beginning to see what had been right in front of their eyes all along. One afternoon, as Malik sat in the library, attempting to finish his homework amidst the noise of students around him, he saw Sarah walking toward him. She was holding a folder in one hand, looking both nervous and determined. "Malik," she said quietly as she stopped at his table, her face flushed. "We need to talk." Malik looked up, surprised by the intensity in her voice. "What's up?" Sarah lowered her voice, glancing around the library before sitting down next to him. "I overheard something today, in Mr. Hanson's class. The students were talking about you again, and it's bad. Really bad." Malik's heart sank. He had been dreading this moment. He knew that people had been talking behind his back, but hearing Sarah confirm it made everything feel more real. What did they say? Sarah hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her words. They were making fun of you, laughing about how you're wasting your time, how someone like you doesn't deserve to be in the same room as them, let alone dream of being a doctor. Malik closed his eyes for a moment, fighting to keep the anger at bay. He had already faced so much. He had endured endless ridicule. But hearing this from Sarah, hearing it so plainly, it felt like a punch to the gut. "I'm so sorry," Sarah added softly. "It's not right, and I know it's hurting you. But you can't let them get to you. You've got to stay strong. You've already done the hardest part. You've already proven to yourself that you can do this." Malik shook his head, his frustration bubbling over. "It's not that simple. They don't understand. They'll never understand." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with empathy, but also with something else, something like quiet determination. "Maybe they don't understand, But that doesn't mean they get to define you, Malik. That doesn't mean they get to control your future. You don't have to prove anything to them. You just have to prove it to yourself. Malik looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. She had been the only one who hadn't treated him like a joke. She had stood up for him when no one else would. And it wasn't just pity, it was real belief in him. He had to believe it too. "Thanks, Sarah," Malik said quietly, his voice tight. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah smiled, a slight but genuine expression that made him feel a little lighter. "You'll make it, Malik. Just don't give up." The next day, Malik entered Mr. Hansen's class with a sense of quiet defiance. He knew it was going to be difficult. He knew the mocking would start again, that the whispers would be there, just out of earshot, but he was done being afraid. Mr. Hansen stood at the front of the class, scribbling notes on the board. When he turned around, his eyes landed on Malik. For a brief moment, there was something like a flicker of recognition in the teacher's eyes, an almost imperceptible shift that told Malik that Mr. Hansen knew exactly what he had done. But it didn't matter. Malik wasn't going to let him control the room anymore. "Malik," Mr. Hansen called, his voice cold. "I trust you've had enough time to prepare for today's exam." Malik nodded, but before he could sit down, he felt the eyes of his classmates on him. They were waiting for him to falter. They were waiting for him to mess up. He could almost hear Brandon's voice in his head. "You'll never make it, Malik. You don't belong here." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Today wasn't about proving anything to them. Today was about proving it to himself. When the exam started, Malik kept his head down, focusing on the questions in front of him. He could feel the weight of their stares, but he didn't look up. His pencil moved across the paper, faster now, more sure of itself. For once, he didn't feel like he was just playing catch-up. For once, he felt like he belonged here. He could do this. He would do this. The clock ticked down. Mr. Hansen walked around the room, his footsteps slow and deliberate. But Malik didn't flinch. He just kept working, determined to finish strong. As the exam ended and the class began to file out, Malik's heart was still racing. He was proud of himself. He knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, that every day would come with new challenges, new obstacles. But for the first time, he felt ready. He wasn't backing down anymore. The following week, the school was buzzing with rumors about the final exam scores. Everyone was talking about the grades, who had done well, who had struggled, who had barely passed. Malik hadn't heard from his classmates about how he did, but he knew they were watching him closely. The moment the grades were posted on the classroom door, Malik walked down the hallway toward it with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He wasn't sure what to expect. He didn't care about being at the top of the class. He just wanted to prove to everyone that he wasn't some mistake, some failure waiting to happen. When he reached the door, he stood there for a moment, looking at the list of names. His heart skipped a beat when his eyes found his own name near the top of the list. He had done it. He had scored higher than most of the students in the class, including the ones who had always mocked him. Mr. Hansen hadn't even bothered to look at his project. Instead, he had made assumptions about Malik's capabilities based on the color of his skin, the way he dressed, the way he spoke. But this time, Malik had proven him wrong. The victory was small, but it was his, and it was enough. Later that evening, Malik walked home, the wind brushing against his face. He could feel the weight of the day lifting off his shoulders. For the first time, he felt like he had control over his own future. He wasn't going to let Mr. Hansen or anyone else take that from him. As he reached his front door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Sarah. "I heard about the exam. I knew you could do it. Keep going, Malik. You're on the right path." A smile tugged at the corners of Malik's mouth. He had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. And no matter what they said, no matter how many times they tried to knock him down, he wasn't going to stop. He had a dream, and it was worth fighting for. The battle was far from over, but Malik was ready. The moment Malik received his final grades for the semester, he felt like the weight of the world had momentarily lifted from his shoulders. He had done it. He had proven, at least to himself, that he could succeed. But as the week wore on, the victory he had felt seemed to fade under the relentless pressure of everything else. The constant whispers, the sideways glances, and the unspoken assumption that he didn't belong. all gnawed at him like a constant, bitter undercurrent. They hadn't stopped. The mocking hadn't stopped. The final bell of the school year rang on a Friday afternoon, and Malik stood in the hallway, staring at the door of his locker. He had spent so much time preparing for this moment, getting through the semester, the exams, the constant battle to prove himself. But now that it was over, it felt like nothing had changed. The looks were still there. The mockery still stung. He was walking home, the street outside the school buzzing with students leaving for the weekend, when he noticed Brandon and a couple of his friends walking ahead of him. They were laughing loudly, as always. Malik had been doing his best to ignore them, to rise above their taunts. But today, something in the pit of his stomach told him that they weren't going to let him go that easily. "Hey, Malik!" Brandon called out, his voice loud and cutting through the crowd. The words felt like they were meant just for him, a spotlight of ridicule in a sea of students. "I bet you're pretty proud of yourself, huh? Finally, managed to pass your tests. Good for you, man. But don't get ahead of yourself, all right? You're still nowhere near good enough for med school." The laughter from his friends followed, echoing off the walls of the school's front steps. Malik could feel the eyes of the students around them drifting toward him, some curious, some amused, and others just indifferent. But to him, it felt like every single one of them was part of the mockery. He had hoped, so desperately, that this time, this final stretch of the year would be different, that the looks, the words would finally stop. But here they were, still holding him to the same judgment, still deciding who he was based on nothing but their own assumptions. Malik stopped walking, standing frozen in the middle of the sidewalk. The sting of their words pierced through him, deeper than any insult had before. "People like you don't belong in medical school. You'll never be one of us." Their laughter cut through him like a knife, and for a brief moment, he thought he might just crumble under the weight of it all. But then, something shifted. Something deep inside him. He had heard these words before, and he was tired. Tired of being treated like he wasn't worthy. Tired of people deciding his fate for him. Tired of constantly fighting for a place in a world that refused to acknowledge his worth. He clenched his fists at his sides, his breath steadying, and he forced himself to look up. "Enough," Malik said, his voice low but clear. It wasn't the kind of anger he had expected. It wasn't a rage that threatened to tear him apart. It was calm, calculated. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." Brandon stopped laughing for a moment, a confused look crossing his face. The smirk on his face faltered just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I mean," Malik continued, his words firm, "I've had enough of being treated like I'm less than. You don't get to define me, not anymore." The crowd around them had begun to quiet, the other students sensing the tension in the air. Malik felt their eyes on him, but this time it didn't make him shrink. He stood his ground. For the first time, he wasn't backing down. Brandon narrowed his eyes, a smirk returning to his face. "Oh, I see," he said, stepping closer. "Now you think you're tough. You think you can stand up to me, huh? You really believe that you're better than us?" "No," Malik said, his voice unwavering. "But I believe I'm worthy of everything you think I'm not, and I'm done letting people like you tell me otherwise." Brandon and his friends exchanged looks, the mockery fading from their faces just slightly. They weren't expecting this, but instead of retreating, they stepped forward, pushing their weight into Malik's space. The air between them thickened, and for a moment, Malik thought they were about to make it physical. But then, just as quickly as the tension had risen, something else happened. A voice, calm and powerful, broke through the crowd. "That's enough, Brandon!" The words echoed through the courtyard, cutting through the noise. The crowd parted, and there stood Keisha, Malik's older sister, her expression fierce. She had been standing by the school entrance waiting for him, but had stepped forward when she saw the confrontation. Her presence commanded attention, her eyes sharp as she locked onto Brandon and his friends. Keisha had always been the calm one, the one who handled things with intelligence and grace. But when it came to her brother, when it came to anyone she cared about, she didn't back down. Brandon and his friends hesitated, their expressions changing from smug amusement to something less certain. Keisha didn't give them a chance to respond. "I've been watching you, Brandon," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "And I've had enough of you bullying my brother, enough of the mockery. Enough of the judgment. You have no idea what Malik has been through, and frankly, you don't get to decide his future for him. Brandon shifted on his feet, his confidence faltering in the face of Keisha's unyielding gaze. "What's your problem, Keisha?" he sneered, but the venom had been drained from his tone. "My problem," Keisha replied, stepping closer, "is that you think you can tell my brother that his dreams don't matter, that his worth is defined by people like you. And that's where you're wrong. People like him, people like us, we don't need your approval. We're going to make it, no matter how hard you try to tear us down." Keisha turned to Malik, her eyes softening. "And you, Malik," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You've already proven that you're more than good enough." Malik felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't explain. He felt strong, stronger than he had in months. He had felt like he was fighting alone, like the world had been determined to shut him out. But now, with Keisha standing beside him, with her unshakable belief in him, the weight felt a little lighter. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Brandon and his friends, realizing they had lost their audience, turned away, muttering under their breath. Keisha watched them go, her eyes never leaving them until they were out of sight. When she turned back to Malik, there was a sense of victory in her eyes. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Malik nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I think I am." Keisha smiled back, proud of her little brother. "Good, because that's the first step, standing up for yourself, and trust me, it's the most important step." The next week was a whirlwind of emotions. After the confrontation with Brandon and his friends, things seemed to change, but not in the way Malik had hoped. The whispers didn't stop. The judgment didn't stop. It only seemed to grow stronger, more overt. Malik felt like he was back where he started, fighting a battle that no one seemed to understand. He'd made a stand, but the weight of the world was still pressing down on him. At lunch one day, as Malik sat alone in the cafeteria trying to tune out the noise, Mr. Hanson walked in with his usual smug expression. The teacher paused as he saw Malik sitting at one of the tables by himself, and without a word he walked over, his steps heavy with authority. "Malik," Mr. Hanson said, his voice almost too casual, "I just wanted to let you know that I'm really impressed by your recent performance. You managed to scrape by with a passing grade this time. I guess you're not as hopeless as I thought." The words were patronizing, condescending. Malik's stomach churned at the implication that he was somehow less than, that all of his hard work had only earned him the smallest of acknowledgements. Malik stood up, meeting Mr. Hanson's eyes. His heart was racing, but he wasn't about to let the teacher get away with it. "Thank you," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "But I didn't do this for your approval. I did it for me." Mr. Hanson looked at him, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he scoffed and turned away. "Sure, Malik, sure," he muttered, walking off without another word. Malik exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He didn't need Mr. Hanson's approval. He didn't need anyone's approval but his own. And in that moment, he realized something crucial. He had already won. The fight, the struggle, the moments of self-doubt, they were all part of his journey, but he was stronger than ever before, and no one could take that from him. The summer passed quickly, and with it, the quiet anticipation of the next chapter in Malik's life. He had spent the time preparing his college applications, refining his essays, and most importantly, believing in himself. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was living. He was fighting for something, and that something was more important than any judgment or insult could ever be. He knew the battle wasn't over. The world would keep trying to knock him down, keep telling him he didn't belong. But Malik wasn't backing down. He was going to medical school. He was going to show them all that he belonged, no matter what they said. And when the time came, when he stood at the front of that classroom, medical degree in hand, he would know that every fight, every struggle, every tear had been worth it, because he had made it. He had proved them all wrong. Malik had never been more determined in his life. The final stretch before college applications were due had arrived, and every waking hour was spent researching medical programs, writing personal statements, and perfecting his application materials. He had spent the past few years working relentlessly, doing everything in his power to prove to himself, and to everyone else that he belonged. But even as the weight of his hard work bore down on him, there were moments when the doubts crept in, like a cloud that never fully dissipated. Could he really make it? Could he ever break through the barriers of prejudice and expectation that had been placed in his path? The sneers, the whispered insults, the sideways glances, Malik had gotten used to them, but they didn't hurt any less. The ridicule didn't stop just because he had worked hard or earned good grades. The racism that lingered beneath the surface of every conversation still thrived. It was in the way teachers dismissed his contributions in class, in the way classmates laughed when he mentioned his future aspirations, in the way they assumed his background defined him more than his abilities. It was Friday afternoon when Malik found himself standing in the hall outside Mr. Hansen's classroom, his heart heavy with anticipation. The semester was drawing to a close, and it had been months since that fateful encounter when Mr. Hansen had belittled him in front of the class. Malik had done everything in his power to rise above the negativity, to focus on his work and his goals. But now, as he waited outside the door, the memory of that moment and the realization that it might happen again gnawed at him. Malik wasn't just facing Mr. Hansen now. He was facing an entire system that had been designed to keep students like him from succeeding, an invisible hand that tried to push him back into his place. But today, he wasn't going to let that happen. He couldn't. He had worked too hard to let one man, one teacher, define his future. The bell rang, signaling the start of class, and Malik hesitated for a moment before walking through the door. As soon as he entered, Mr. Hansen's eyes landed on him. The same condescending expression was there, like a mask that Malik had become all too familiar with. It was as though Mr. Hansen was waiting for Malik to fail, waiting to be able to tell him, once again, that people like him didn't belong. "Malik," Mr. Hansen said, his voice cold as usual, "I see you're back, ready to disappoint again." Malik's fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't let the teacher get to him. He had too much at stake. "I'm ready," Malik said, his voice steady. "I've been working hard, and I'm here to give it my best shot." Mr. Hansen sneered, clearly unimpressed. "Your best shot, huh?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the rest of the class to hear. "Well, I suppose we'll see what you've got, but don't get your hopes up." The words stung, more than Malik cared to admit, but he refused to let them show. He had been here before. He had endured worse, and he was still standing. He walked to his desk and sat down, pulling out his notebook, trying to ignore the eyes of his classmates on him. The whispers started almost immediately, like a quiet hum behind him. "He doesn't belong here," he could hear one of the students whisper. "He's just wasting his time. No way he's getting into med school." Malik tightened his jaw and focused on the task at hand. He wouldn't let their words break him. He was better than that. But then, just as he was about to lose himself in his notes, Mr. Hansen's voice cut through the air again, this time louder and more deliberate. "All right, class," Mr. Hansen said, clearly relishing the attention. "Let's talk about the upcoming exam. I know we've all been waiting for it, and I know some of you are more prepared than others." His eyes flickered toward Malik as he said it, and Malik could feel the familiar weight of judgment settle back on his shoulders. He tried to ignore it, but it was hard. The other students' eyes flicked between him and the teacher, the air thick with their silent judgment. "Malik," Mr. Hansen continued, "I hope you've studied hard, because I'm not sure how much your effort will make up for your lack of natural talent." The words, though familiar, hit harder than they had before. Malik could feel his face flush with anger, but he refused to give Mr. Hansen the satisfaction of seeing him react. He would rise above it. He had to. Before he could respond, Sarah, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the class, raised her hand. "Mr. Hansen," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "That's not fair. Malik has been working hard, and just because he doesn't fit your narrow idea of who should succeed doesn't mean he doesn't deserve a shot." Malik looked up in surprise. Sarah, the quiet girl who had always kept to herself, was speaking up for him. He had never expected this, never expected anyone to stand up to Mr. Hansen on his behalf. The class fell silent as everyone turned to watch the exchange. Mr. Hansen's expression darkened. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but this is about the quality of work, not the effort. And I'm not about to give participation trophies to students who can't deliver." That's not what this is about, Sarah shot back. It's about giving everyone a fair chance. And you haven't been fair. You've been dismissive, rude, and frankly racist. I'm not the only one who's noticed. Malik could feel the eyes of the class shift between Sarah and Mr. Hanson, the tension in the air thickening with each passing second. For the first time, Mr. Hanson seemed at a loss for words. The usual smug arrogance had disappeared from his face, replaced by a flicker of discomfort. Sarah didn't back down. Just because Malik doesn't look like you or speak like you doesn't mean he doesn't deserve the same opportunities. We all know what's been going on, Mr. Hanson. You can't pretend it's not there. Malik felt a rush of gratitude flood through him, mixed with an emotion he hadn't expected. Hope. He hadn't been alone in this. Sarah had seen it too. She had noticed the way Mr. Hanson had treated him, the way the class had judged him before he even had the chance to prove himself. You're right, Malik finally said, his voice steady but filled with determination. I'm not going to let anyone tell me I don't belong here. I've worked too hard for this, and I'm not backing down. Mr. Hanson opened his mouth to respond, but the bell rang before he could get a word out. The students began to file out of the room, some casting nervous glances at Malik, others still whispering among themselves. But it didn't matter. Malik had finally done something he hadn't thought possible. He had stood up for himself, and it felt good. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was more than just a student in the background. He was seen. He had a voice. As he walked out of the classroom with Sarah by his side, the hallways felt different. The air seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Things had changed. The fight wasn't over. But Malik had taken the first step towards something more, towards something real. Later that evening, as Malik sat at his desk, working on his college applications, he received a text from Keisha. It was a simple message, but it made his heart swell with pride. I'm proud of you, little brother. Keep fighting. Keep going. He smiled to himself, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but Malik was ready. He wasn't backing down anymore. And no matter what happened, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to prove them all wrong. He was going to make it. The battle was far from over, but Malik had finally found the strength to keep going, and nothing could take that away from him. The days leading up to Malik's college decision were some of the hardest he had ever endured. As the letters and emails from various medical schools began to arrive, each one felt like a test of his worth. But this time, he didn't feel the same sense of dread he had felt before. He knew that he had already won, no matter what the outcome. The real victory was in how far he had come, how much he had fought to get here. But the world around him had made it clear time and time again that the road to success was never going to be easy for him. His skin, his background, his dreams, they had all been sources of mockery, targets for people who were determined to make him feel smaller than he was. Every step forward had been met with 2 steps back. He had fought through every insult, every condescending comment, every sideways glance, just to stand in front of that computer screen, waiting for the notification that would change his life. The tension was unbearable as Malik sat at his desk in his room, the glow of the computer screen illuminating his face in the dim light of the evening. The decision letters had started to come in. But there was one, the one that Malik had been waiting for. He had put everything into this application, pouring his heart into the essay, into the interviews, into the application itself. This was his chance to make his dreams a reality. This was his shot to show the world that he was more than they thought he was. He opened the email. Dear Malik Thompson. He paused. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin around him. His fingers hovered over the mouse, shaking as he read the next few words. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to our medical program for the fall semester. Malik sat there stunned, staring at the screen. His mind raced. He had done it. He had actually done it. After everything, the insults, the mockery, the constant barrage of doubt, he had made it. And suddenly, the pain of every cruel comment, every sneer, every moment when he had been made to feel less than seemed so distant. He had proved them all wrong. This was his moment. This was everything he had worked for. Tears welled in his eyes as he sat back in his chair. He was not some invisible kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He was not just the sum of their prejudices, their racism, and their scorn. He was someone who had fought for his place in the world, and now the world had recognized him. But as his relief settled in, the voice of doubt, that constant companion, crept into his mind. What about Mr. Hanson? What about the kids who had laughed at him, who had called him crazy for dreaming so big? They wouldn't let him forget. They would never let him live it down. The phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He picked it up, still shaking, and saw a message from Keisha. "I knew you could do it, little brother. You've earned this. Now go make them see what they couldn't." Malik smiled, his chest tight with emotion. The years of pain and struggle had been worth it. His sister had been there through it all, always supporting him, always pushing him forward. She had been his anchor when the world had tried to drown him. And now they were both going to see his dream come true. The following days were filled with a mixture of celebration and reflection. Malik had worked hard, and now he was ready to take on the next chapter of his life. The acceptance letter from the prestigious medical school was just the beginning, but there was one more thing he had to do, something he had been dreading for months. It was time to face Mr. Hanson. Malik hadn't spoken to his teacher since the day of the confrontation, but he knew that this moment was inevitable. He had been so focused on his own journey that he hadn't realized how deeply the impact of Mr. Hanson's words had affected him. Mr. Hanson had never been anything but cruel to him, dismissive, judgmental, and racist. Malik had always known that the teacher saw him as less than, but now, standing on the threshold of his future, he realized that he couldn't leave this chapter of his life unfinished. On a Monday morning, Malik walked into school, his heart steady despite the nerves that were beginning to build. He knew what he had to do. Mr. Hanson was sitting at his desk when Malik walked into the classroom. The teacher looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw Malik standing there, the silence stretching between them. "What do you want, Malik?" Mr. Hanson asked, his voice as cold as ever. "I just wanted to talk," Malik said, his voice firm but controlled. "I wanted to let you know that I got into medical school." Mr. Hanson's expression didn't change, but Malik could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something like doubt, something like surprise. He wasn't used to hearing Malik say something like that, and for the first time, Malik didn't feel like he had to explain himself or apologize for his ambition. "I worked hard for this," Malik continued, "and I'm going to make it. No matter how many people like you tried to tell me that I didn't belong, no matter how many times you tried to shut me down, I kept going. And now, I've got my future in my hands." Mr. Hanson scoffed, but Malik didn't back down. "I don't need your approval, Mr. Hanson. I'm going to med school, and I'm going to prove everyone who doubted me wrong. I'm not just the kid you thought I was." For a moment, the room was silent. Mr. Hanson stared at him, his mouth open, but no words coming out. And Malik, standing tall, didn't give him the satisfaction of saying anything more. He had already said everything that needed to be said. Without waiting for a response, Malik turned and walked out of the room. As he passed through the hallway, he could hear the murmurs of his classmates, some of them still judging, some of them starting to look at him with something else in their eyes. It didn't matter anymore. Malik wasn't walking through the halls as a defeated, invisible kid anymore. He was walking through the halls as someone who knew his worth. He had earned this moment. He had earned everything. Later that night, Malik sat at the kitchen table, a letter in his hands. It was from the medical school, his future school. His mind raced as he opened it, feeling the weight of the moment. The letter, which had once seemed like a distant, unreachable goal, was now in his hands. As he read through the acceptance letter, his emotions ran high. This was real. This was everything he had worked for. He could feel the tears pricking at his eyes again. But this time, they were different. They weren't tears of frustration or doubt. They were tears of victory. He had done it. He had fought against the world, against every single person who had tried to tell him he couldn't, and he had won. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more obstacles, more battles, but Malik knew something now that he had never fully understood before. He was strong enough to face it. He was ready, and nothing was going to stop him from reaching his dreams. As he looked out the window, the sun setting on a quiet evening, Malik felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fight had been long, and the road had been harder than he could have ever imagined. But he had made it. He'd fought with everything he had. And now the world would see him for who he truly was. The end of one fight was just the beginning of another, and Malik was ready. This was only the start. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What did you think of Malik's journey? Have you ever faced challenges like racism or prejudice in your own life? Your feedback means so much to us, and we truly value every one of you who listens, shares, and supports. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay updated with our future content. Your support helps us continue to create more stories. Have a wonderful day, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know you're listening by leaving a phrase related to the story. We can't wait to hear from you.